The first human homes were nothing but woven branches and animal skins. Thousands of years later, people were moving stones heavier than elephants to build the pyramids. How did we make that staggering leap? The architectural evolution from simple settlements to stone empires is the hidden story of civilization itself. By the end of this journey, you will understand the 6 fundamental principles that allowed humanity to conquer gravity and build for eternity. We will uncover how a single invention in mud changed the world, and why some of the greatest stone mysteries were solved long before modern machinery. What do you believe is the most powerful force that drives us to build? This monumental leap in our story begins with a simple but revolutionary decision. To stop moving, for nearly 2 million years our ancestors followed the herds and the seasons, their homes temporary and carried on their backs. Then something changed. In a few lush river valleys, groups of people began to notice that the seeds they dropped near their camps grew back the following year. This was the quiet discovery of agriculture, and it rewrote the human story. Instead of chasing food, they could cultivate it. This meant staying in one place to tend and protect the harvest. With that single choice, architecture was born. The need for a portable shelter vanished, replaced by a new demand for something permanent, something that could withstand seasons, store food, and define a space as home. Picture a family along the fertile banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The wild wheat is abundant, and they decide to stay. Their first home isn't a grand design, it's a necessity. They dig a shallow pit for stability, gather reeds from the riverbank to weave into walls, and pack mud from the earth to seal it all together. The roof is a thatch of grasses. This simple, circular hut, often just a few meters across, is humanity's first true architectural statement. It says we are here to stay. We see these very structures at ancient sites like Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey, a sprawling Neolithic town where homes were built right up against one another, entered through holes in the roof. These were more than just shelters from the rain. They became the cradle of everything we associate with civilization. Inside these walls, the concept of private property emerged. The idea of community was solidified as neighbors lived side by side, year after year. A new, deep relationship with a specific piece of land was forged. The materials were humble, almost laughably simple from our modern perspective. Mud, reeds, wood, and stone were all that was available. Yet, in their use, we see the first sparks of architectural principle. That mud wasn't just slapped on. It was mixed with straw to prevent cracking as it dried, an early form of composite material. Posts were sunk into the ground for stability. The circular shape was strong, resistant to wind, and easy to build with simple tools. This era presents us with a profound mystery, however. What exactly triggered this shift in different parts of the world at roughly the same time, after millions of years of wandering? Was it a change in climate, applying pressure to find new food sources? Was it a social innovation, a new way of thinking about cooperation and territory? The answer is likely a complex tapestry of environmental cues and human ingenuity. But this puzzle sets the entire foundation. Once you have a permanent home, everything else follows. You need to store your grain, which means pots and baskets. You need to defend your settlement, which means walls. You begin to accumulate possessions, and with them, status. The seed of the city, and eventually the empire, was planted in the mud of those first fragile huts. The journey from that mud to mountain, like monuments of stone, is a story of solving one relentless problem after another, starting with the most basic question of all. How do you keep the walls from falling down? That first mud and reed hut held a hidden flaw, one that would define the next 1,000 years of building. It was rooted in the earth, but not truly anchored to it. Rain would soften the ground, causing posts to shift. winter frosts would heave the soil, cracking walls. The very ground itself was an unpredictable enemy. To build something meant to last more than a season, humanity had to solve this foundational problem, both literally and philosophically. This leads us to the first and most critical principle in our architectural evolution. The foundation is everything. It is the silent, unseen contract between a structure and the earth, a declaration that this building intends to stay. Early builders learned this lesson through hardship. A post driven directly into soft soil would rot within a few years, doomed by moisture and insects. The entire building would list and sag as the ground settled unevenly beneath it. The solution emerged from simple observation and trial. Instead of just placing a post, they began to dig. Archaeologists studying the ancient city of Jericho, one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited settlements, have uncovered trenches cut into the bedrock. These weren't for drainage but for stability. Builders would dig a trench, line it with stones to create a solid, level base, and then set their wooden posts or mudbrick walls upon it. This was a monumental cognitive leap. It was no longer about building on the ground but building into it. That stone lining did more than prevent rot. It distributed the weight of the wall over a wider area, preventing uneven settling. Think of it like the difference between standing in soft sand wearing high heels versus wearing snowshoes. The snowshoes spread your weight, keeping you stable. Those first stone footings were architectural snowshoes. This principle of the unseen foundation represents humanity's first conscious, engineered attempt to defy time and the elements. It shifted architecture from a reaction to the environment to a negotiation with it. By creating a stable, level plane to build upon, everything changed. Walls could be built straighter and taller because they weren't constantly fighting a shifting base. With confidence in the ground, builders could begin to think vertically. A stable foundation also meant structures could be repaired and rebuilt in the same exact footprint for generations, allowing knowledge and technique to accumulate in one location. The home was no longer a disposable object, it was a legacy. What's truly fascinating is how this technical solution reflects a deeper shift in human thinking. To invest the enormous labor of quarrying and moving stones to bury them in the dirt, where no one would ever see them, requires planning for a future beyond one's own lifetime. It requires trust in a community that will maintain and inherit what you start. The foundation is an act of faith in permanence. Once this principle was locked in place, once builders knew they could create a stable base, the architectural imagination was unleashed. The next challenge was not how to stand on the earth, but how to create a space within the walls. And that demanded a new kind of invention, one that would turn a solid wall into an open doorway and support the very sky above our heads. Yet this stable foundation created a new and pressing demand. With a level base secured, builders now needed something to put on top of it that was better than woven reeds and packed earth. They needed a true wall. The answer came not from the quarry but from the riverbank, and it would become one of humanity's most transformative inventions. The first standardized building block was born from mud. Take a handful of wet clay from a riverbed, mix in chopped straw or animal hair to act as a binder, preventing the material from cracking as it dries. Press this mixture into a simple wooden mold, a box with no bottom. Lift the mold away and you are left with a perfect rectangular form. Then you let the sun do the rest. After days of baking under a hot sky, that lump of mud becomes a solid, durable brick. This process, perfected in the fertile plains of Mesopotamia around 7,500 years before the Common Era, was nothing short of a revolution. For the first time, construction had a repeatable, modular unit. Think of it like the difference between carving each piece of a puzzle individually versus having a machine stamp out identical, interlocking pieces. The mudbrick democratized building. It did not require rare materials or specialized stone working skills. Almost anyone could make them, and they could be produced in vast numbers. This simple technology changed the landscape of human society. With a ready supply of bricks, communities could grow rapidly and deliberately. They could build not just individual homes, but entire neighborhoods with straight walls and right angles defining orderly streets. They could construct formidable defensive walls, turning a settlement into a citadel, and eventually they could reach for the heavens. The great step temples known as Ziggurats, the mountain-like centers of Mesopotamian cities, were essentially mountains of mudbrick, often faced with a skin of baked brick for protection from the rain. Each of those millions of bricks represented a unit of labor, a unit of belief, and a unit of political will. This is where the humble brick transcends mere material and enters the realm of myth and power. In many of these early empires, bricks were not anonymous. They were often stamped with the seal or name of the reigning king. Every brick in a city wall, every brick in a temple, became a tiny, permanent billboard declaring the ruler's authority and divine favor. A wall was no longer just a barrier. It was a political statement woven into the very fabric of the city. Walking through those streets meant being surrounded, literally, by the name and legacy of the king. It was architecture as propaganda, baked into the sun-dried clay. This innovation presents us with a fascinating chicken and egg mystery of civilization. Was the invention of the brick a cause or a consequence of the first cities? Did the need to house a growing, dense population force the development of a rapid building technology? Or did the very existence of an easy-to-use, standardized block enable people to congregate in large numbers for the first time, making urban life possible? The truth likely lies in the middle, a feedback loop where a social impulse and a material innovation fueled each other. The brick did not just pave the way for urban life, it built its walls, its temples, and its hierarchies. It allowed human ambition to be stacked, layer upon layer, into the sky. But stacking bricks, or stones for that matter, creates a new and fundamental architectural dilemma. How do you span an empty space between two walls? How do you create a doorway, a window, or a room? The solution to this problem would require a brilliant and beautiful trick of physics, one that still defines our city skylines today. But with every brick laid and every wall raised, a new question emerged. How would all these individual structures relate to one another? The transition from a cluster of isolated huts to a true village represents another monumental leap in human thought. It is the moment we stopped just building shelters and started building societies, with architecture as its blueprint. The layout of a village is not random. It is a physical expression of a community's deepest values, its fears, and its aspirations. To understand this, we can look to one of the world's most astonishing early towns, Çatalhöyük. Here, around 9,000 years ago, people created something utterly unique. Instead of streets, there was a continuous, honeycombed maze of rectangular mudbrick houses, all sharing walls. There were no doors at ground level. To enter your home, you climbed a ladder and descended through a hole in the roof. This bizarre and brilliant design speaks volumes. It was a fortress of community. The blank, windowless outer walls presented a unified defensive front to the outside world, protecting against both animal threats and potentially rival human groups. All movement and social life happened on the rooftops, which formed a vast, elevated plaza. This was where daily chores were done, where children played, and where neighbors interacted. The architecture forced a certain kind of social intimacy and collective security. Privacy, as we think of it, was minimal. The community came first, literally built into the fabric of the town. Contrast this with the linear villages that began to appear elsewhere. In parts of Europe, archaeologists find longhouses arranged in orderly rows with clear pathways between them. These layouts suggest a different priority. They facilitated movement, trade, and perhaps the management of livestock. They also created clear boundaries between private family spaces and public thoroughfares. This shift from the inward-facing labyrinth of Çatalhöyük to the outward-facing street plan marks a subtle but profound change. It indicates a society becoming more confident in its environment, more engaged in external exchange, and possibly beginning to accommodate differences in status or wealth through the size and placement of homes. The placement of key features tells the rest of the story. The communal oven was not hidden away. It was a central hearth both literally and socially. Gathering there for warmth and to bake bread reinforced bonds. Ritual spaces, often decorated with elaborate paintings of wild animals and symbolic figures, were frequently incorporated directly into homes, suggesting that spiritual life was deeply woven into domestic life, not separated from it. This early urban planning created a human-made ecosystem. The village was a machine for living, designed to manage waste, provide security, foster social cohesion, and express a shared worldview. Every decision, from the orientation of a house to the location of the communal granary, was a piece of social engineering. It was a first draft of the social contract, written not on paper, but in mudbrick and pathway. This raises a compelling question for us today. What do our own city layouts, with their grids, suburbs, and skyscrapers, say about our modern values? Are we building for isolation or connection, for efficiency or for community? The ancient planners of Çatalhöyük and those first linear villages were grappling with the same fundamental human puzzles we still face. They just used different tools, and as these planned communities grew more complex, as wealth and power concentrated, a new architectural element would arise that forever changed the relationship between people and their built environment. It was a structure not for living in but for looking up to, a bridge between earth and the divine. This new social landscape demanded a new kind of architecture, one that reached beyond the home. As communities grew, so did their shared beliefs, and a powerful need emerged to create spaces that honored forces greater than themselves. This spiritual ambition collided with a stubborn physical problem. How do you create a doorway in a solid stone wall, or support a roof over a sacred gathering space? The solution arrived in a form of breathtaking simplicity, yet it was one of humanity's greatest structural triumphs. This is the second principle, the post and lintel. Think of it as the very first architectural sentence composed of just two words: a post, which is a vertical support, and a lintel, the horizontal beam laid across it. Two upright stones holding a third stone across their tops. It seems almost childishly simple, but this basic arrangement represented a profound cognitive leap. For the first time, humans were not just stacking material, they were engineering space. They were creating a void, a deliberate emptiness framed by weight and stability. This allowed for the very idea of a defined entrance, a window, or an interior room. We see this principle in its earliest, most awe-inspiring form, not in grand cities, but in the lonely landscapes of ancient Europe. Scattered across places like England, France, and Ireland are the dolmens and menhirs, mysterious stone assemblies erected over 5,000 years ago. A dolmen is often a massive, table-like structure, a large flat stone resting on two or three upright ones. These were not random arrangements. They were carefully engineered tombs and ceremonial sites, requiring communities to solve immense logistical puzzles. To build one, people had to first select a gigantic slab of stone, often weighing many tons. Then they had to transport it, possibly using rollers, sledges, and sheer human effort across miles of countryside. Finally, they had to raise the upright posts, likely by digging a trench, tilting the stone in, and packing earth around its base. The final act was the most daring, lifting the colossal lintel stone to rest perfectly atop the posts. This was not brute force, it was applied physics. It required an intuitive understanding of balance, leverage, and most importantly, the behavior of stone itself. The posts are in compression, their strength coming from being squeezed by the weight above. The lintel is in tension, its strength tested by its own weight trying to bend it in the middle. By getting this relationship right, early builders discovered they could make stone defy gravity, creating a sheltered space that could last for millennia. The post and lintel became the essential grammar for all future stone architecture. It was the foundational concept behind the columns and entablatures of Egyptian temples, the grand propylons of Greek gateways, and the stone circles like Stonehenge. Each of those structures is at its heart an elaborate and refined expression of this same basic idea. But this principle also reveals a limitation, a constraint that would challenge builders for centuries. The span between the two posts is limited by the strength of the lintel. A stone beam can only stretch so far before it cracks under its own weight. This meant that to create a large interior space, like a temple hall, you needed a forest of columns to hold up the roof. The dream of a vast, open, column-free space remained just out of reach, a puzzle that would require another brilliant leap of imagination, one that involved not fighting gravity, but inviting it to work in a whole new way. The post and lintel solved the problem of space, but it created an even greater one of scale. To build truly monumental architecture, you first have to move the mountain. Scattered across our planet are stones that defy simple explanation. On a windswept plain in England, giants of Sarsen sandstone stand in a silent circle. On a remote Polynesian island, colossal stone faces gaze inland from volcanic slopes. In the highlands of Peru, blocks fit together so tightly a razor blade cannot slip between them. These are the megaliths, and they present us with one of history's most captivating puzzles. How did cultures separated by oceans and millennia, with no written records, no wheels, and no metal tools, accomplish the same staggering feat? They moved mountains stone by stone. Take the great trilithons of Stonehenge. The largest of these uprights weighs around 25 tons, and the Sarsen stones were dragged from quarries over 20 miles away. The iconic Moai statues of Easter Island, some standing over 30 feet tall and weighing up to 80 tons, were carved from a single volcanic crater and then transported, somehow, across miles of rugged terrain to their coastal platforms. The scale is incomprehensible to the modern mind. This was not the work of a few individuals, but of entire societies mobilized for a purpose that transcended any single lifetime. The leading theories are exercises in elegant, low-tech ingenuity. For transport, the most likely method involved a combination of log rollers, sledges, and sheer human traction. A massive stone could be placed on a sledge built from sturdy timber. That sledge would then be pulled along a track of greased logs that were constantly rotated from the back to the front. Experiments have shown that on level ground, a dedicated team could move a multi-ton stone a few hundred feet per day using this method. For especially challenging terrain or slopes, some researchers propose the use of water lubrication, creating a slick mud path to drastically reduce friction. The act of erection is another puzzle solved by simple physics. To raise an upright stone, a team would likely dig a sloping trench, tip the stone into it, and then use ropes and leverage to slowly pull it vertical, packing the base with stones and earth for stability. But the true mystery is not the engineering. It is the human story behind it. Moving a single 80-ton moai required the coordinated labor of hundreds of people for months or even years. This implies a level of social organization we rarely attribute to so-called prehistoric people. Someone had to plan the project, allocate food and resources for the workers, and maintain the collective will. This was not slave labor under a whip, but almost certainly a communal act of profound spiritual or cultural significance. The shared belief that moving this stone would honor the ancestors, please the gods, or align the heavens was the fuel that powered the entire endeavor. These stones are the ultimate proof that complex, sophisticated societies existed long before we called them empires. They were held together not by bureaucracy, but by a common story, a shared vision carved in stone. This monumental effort hints at a hidden chapter of human history, one where social cohesion and shared purpose could achieve the impossible. It forces us to ask, what do we truly know about the power of a united community? And if they could move mountains with ropes and logs, what does that say about the potential of human cooperation? The legacy of the megaliths is a testament to that collective spirit, but it also highlights a fundamental limitation. The post and lintel system, for all its grandeur, could only create spaces that were a series of doorways. To enclose a vast, uninterrupted interior, to build a ceiling that felt like a sky, humanity needed to invent a new shape, one that turned a structural weakness into its greatest strength. That need for a protected, sacred space would soon demand walls of a different kind. The first cities did not begin with grand palaces or soaring temples. They began with a line in the sand, a boundary that said everything inside was worth protecting. This was the birth of the city wall, and with it, architecture became an instrument of security, identity, and power. Consider the ancient settlement of Jericho, a name that echoes through millennia. Around 10,000 years ago, long before the pyramids, the people of Jericho did something astonishing. They built a stone wall, not a simple fence, but a massive defensive barrier. Archaeological evidence reveals a wall over 26 feet wide at its base and a towering stone watchtower embedded within it. The scale is staggering. Why would a Neolithic community, a group of farmers and herders, invest such colossal effort into a structure of pure defense? The answer lies in what those walls protected. By settling in one place and mastering agriculture, these communities began to accumulate things: grain stores from a successful harvest, crafted tools, pottery, and ritual objects. They had created surplus, the world's first form of concentrated wealth. And where there is wealth, there is something to lose. The monumental wall of Jericho is a silent testament to a new and difficult chapter in the human story. It signals the rise of conflict, the emergence of rival groups, and the hardening of the concept of us versus them. The community was no longer just a family or a clan. It was a collective asset that needed a physical shield. The wall transformed a loose collection of houses into a single, defensible entity. It created a clear distinction between the ordered, safe world within and the unpredictable wilds beyond. But a wall is not just a barrier, it is also a filter. This is where the gate becomes one of history's most important architectural inventions. The gate was the controlled rupture in the wall, the only sanctioned point of contact between inside and outside. It was never just a hole, it was a place of layered meaning. Functionally, it was a choke point for defense where a few guards could control the flow of people and goods. Economically, it became the birthplace of regulated trade and taxation. Socially, it was a stage for ceremony and a seat of judgment. Leaders would often sit at the city gate to settle disputes and proclaim laws, literally grounding their authority in the threshold of the community. To pass through the gate was to transition between worlds, under the watchful eyes of both gods and gods. With the wall and its gate, the very idea of the city was cemented. This was no longer a village, it was a city-state in the making. The architecture now served a dual purpose, keeping threats out while also holding a shared identity in. Everyone inside those stones shared a common fate, protected by the collective labor that had raised them. This shift asks a profound question about our own nature. Does prosperity inevitably lead us to build walls? The people of Jericho, with their granaries full and their homes permanent, answered with stone. They chose to invest their surplus not just in more food, but in a shared promise of security. Their wall is a monument to both human achievement and human anxiety, a pattern that would repeat itself from Babylon to Beijing. And as these walled cities grew richer and more complex, their leaders would seek to build monuments not just for defense, but for glory, reaching for a symbol of power that would touch the sky itself. Within the safety of those walls, a new kind of ambition began to rise, not outward but upward. The city had mastered the horizontal plane, organizing streets and homes and markets. Now it sought a connection to the vertical, to the realm above the clouds. This spiritual yearning found its ultimate expression in a structure that redefined the skyline of ancient Mesopotamia, the Ziggurat. It was not a tomb or a palace, but a man-made mountain, a stairway for the gods, constructed from the very same sun-dried bricks that built the city's homes. The Ziggurat represented a staggering escalation of scale and purpose. The most famous example, the Great Ziggurat of Ur, rose like a colossal tiered cake towards the heavens. Its core was a mountain of mudbrick, millions of units of labor and belief stacked into a solid mass. This core was then encased in a protective skin of baked, bitumen-sealed bricks to shield it from the relentless rains. 3 massive staircases converged at a towering gateway, leading priests and perhaps the king up through 3 levels, each painted a different sacred color to a summit temple. This temple was believed to be the dwelling place of the city's patron deity, a piece of heaven anchored to earth. The architecture here had fully transcended the practical. Every element was symbolic. The stairways were not just for climbing, they were a ritual pathway, a physical manifestation of the journey from the mortal world to the divine. The orientation of the structure was often precisely aligned with celestial bodies, weaving astronomy into its sacred geometry. This was architecture as an act of communication, a desperate and glorious attempt to bridge an unimaginable gap. To build such a monument required something entirely new in human history: the centralized command of an entire society's effort. The Ziggurat was the project of a priest-king, a ruler who wielded both political and divine authority. The construction was a civic and religious duty, mobilizing thousands of workers not as slaves, but as participants in a cosmic project that ensured the favor of the gods and the stability of the world. The Ziggurat's shadow was a constant reminder of this compact, of the power that could marshal such forces and the faith that justified it. This shift from building for community to building for the cosmos is one of the most pivotal in our story. The Ziggurat is the undeniable architectural ancestor of the pyramid. It proves that humanity's drive to conquer height, to build monuments that scrape the sky, was not born from a desire to showcase engineering alone. It was first and foremost fueled by a profound spiritual hunger, by the need to create a fixed point where heaven and earth could meet. In its stepped form, we see the blueprint for all future attempts to reach the divine, a testament to the idea that before we built empires of stone, we built mountains of faith. And from this baked brick sacred mountain, the focus of monumental architecture would shift across the desert to a new kingdom, where the concept of eternity would be reimagined in a far more permanent and enigmatic form. Yet the pyramid's perfect geometry pointed to a fundamental limitation. The post and lintel, for all its strength, created a world of straight lines and right angles. To span a wider space, you needed a forest of columns. To support a heavier load, you needed walls of immense thickness. There was an elegance missing, a sense of flowing, enclosed space. The breakthrough came not from making stone stronger, but from asking it to follow a new path. This is the third principle, the arch, the curve that conquered weight. It was a quiet revolution in physics, disguised as a beautiful shape. Instead of fighting gravity with a rigid beam, the arch invites gravity to work. Picture a simple semicircle of wedge-shaped stones. The central stone, the keystone, is the master key. When it is pressed into place at the very top, it locks all the other stones together. The weight from above is no longer a threat trying to snap a horizontal beam. Instead, it flows down the curve of the arch, channeled outward and downward along the line of the stones, transferring the force into the supporting piers or walls on either side. The stones are in constant compression, squeezed tightly together, making the entire structure immensely strong. This simple redistribution of force changed everything. An arch could span a far wider opening than any stone lintel could ever hope to bridge. It used material with breathtaking efficiency. Where a solid wall would be needed to support a heavy roof, an arched structure could use less stone to create a stronger, more open space. We see the earliest hints of this idea in ancient Mesopotamia, where builders experimented with corbelled arches and vaults, stacking bricks in ever closer rows until they met at the top. But it was the Romans who saw the arch's full potential and built an empire with it. They standardized it, perfected it, and deployed it as the skeletal system of their civilization. The Roman arch was not just for temples, it was for utility and awe. It carried water across valleys in the graceful, stacked tiers of their aqueducts. It defined triumphant entries in their monumental gateways. It created the vast, barrel-vaulted spaces of their public baths and basilicas. The arch allowed them to build on a scale that was both practical and psychologically overwhelming. Walking through a Roman gate was to pass under a mountain of stone that floated on air, a direct demonstration of imperial power and technical mastery. But the arch's greatest gift was what it made possible next. By rotating an arch 360 degrees, you create a dome. The arch's principle of channeling weight outward becomes a perfect hemispherical distribution of force. This was the architectural seed that would one day blossom into the vast celestial ceilings of the Hagia Sophia and the Renaissance cathedrals, spaces that seemed to hold up the sky itself. The arch taught humanity that strength could come from curvature, from a shape that embraced the load rather than merely resisting it. It was a move from brute force to guided flow, a testament to the power of working with natural forces rather than against them. This elegant solution, however, would soon face its greatest test, not in the stable heart of an empire, but in the unpredictable cradle of civilization itself. Across the desert, another civilization was answering the question of eternity with a radical new material, stone itself. The Nile Valley became a vast workshop for immortality, where architecture shed its skin of mud and brick to embrace granite and limestone. This was not merely an upgrade in substance, it was a transformation in purpose. Egyptian builders were not constructing for the community of the living, but for the solitary journey of the pharaoh into the afterlife. Their monuments were machines for resurrection, and every block was a cog in that divine mechanism. This obsession with permanence began modestly with the mastaba. These were low, rectangular tombs with sloping sides, built of mudbrick, essentially a house for eternity. But for a king considered a god on earth, a simple house was not enough. The breakthrough came with the visionary architect Imhotep, serving Pharaoh Djoser around 2,650 years before the Common Era. At Saqqara, Imhotep did something unprecedented. He stacked 6 mastabas of decreasing size on top of one another, creating the step pyramid. It was a staircase to the stars, a literal ascent for the king's soul. This was the moment Egyptian architecture broke free from the ground and began its reach for the celestial. The final, logical leap from the stepped form to the smooth, true pyramid seems almost inevitable in hindsight. It represents the ultimate refinement of the idea, a perfect geometric mountain pointing directly to the sun god Ra. The pyramids at Giza are the pinnacle of this experiment, built with a precision that still baffles observers. How did a Bronze Age society achieve such near-flawless alignment to the cardinal directions? The Great Pyramid's sides are oriented to true north with an error of just a fraction of a degree. The prevailing theory involves careful astronomical observation, likely using the circumpolar stars to find a fixed celestial north, and then using simple sighting rods and shadow lengths to translate that alignment onto the desert floor. It was a blend of celestial worship and practical surveying that turned belief into bedrock. The scale of the operation is what truly reveals the nature of the Egyptian state. Quarrying stones weighing multiple tons was a feat of patient engineering. Workers would cut channels around a block, drive in wooden wedges, and then soak the wood with water. As the wood expanded, it would crack the stone along a clean line. Transport was a symphony of logistics. The stones were likely moved on sledges along specially prepared causeways, lubricated with water or clay, and pulled by large teams of laborers. Recent discoveries suggest a sophisticated system of internal ramps within the pyramid structure itself, allowing blocks to be hauled upward as construction progressed. But the true marvel is the fitting. The limestone casing blocks of the Great Pyramid were placed with joints so precise, so minute, that they were virtually invisible. This was not brute force, it was a culture of meticulous craftsmanship enforced by a highly organized, bureaucratic state. This state was the real engine behind the pyramids. It could conscript labor during the Nile's flood season, when farming was impossible. It could manage the supply chains of food, tools, and materials stretching across the kingdom. It could house and feed thousands of workers in nearby purpose-built villages. The pyramid was as much a political and economic project as a spiritual one, a unifying national endeavor that cemented the pharaoh's absolute authority. This drive for perfection in stone speaks to a profound cultural mindset. For the Egyptians, the chaotic formlessness of the desert was the enemy. The perfect, unchanging geometric shape of the pyramid was a victory over chaos, a promise of eternal order for the king, and by extension for the universe itself. The pyramid was a covenant with eternity, written in millions of tons of stone. It set a terrifyingly high standard, a benchmark of imperial power that would echo through the ages, asking every future empire a simple, daunting question. If you seek to build a legacy that will last forever, how will you match the mountains left by the Nile? The pyramid was a promise, but first it was a payroll. For 20 years, the plateau at Giza was not a silent monument but a deafening, sprawling, living machine. The true genius of the Great Pyramid lies not in its silent geometry, but in the roar of its construction, a feat of logistics that rivals the engineering. This was the ancient world's first mega-project, and it required a system to feed, house, and coordinate thousands of people, day after day, for a generation. Forget the image of endless lines of whipped slaves. Archaeological evidence paints a far more compelling picture. Excavations of the worker villages at Giza reveal bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves of bread daily, fish processing areas, and infirmaries where set bones healed. These were not the quarters of a brutalized underclass, but of a rotating, skilled workforce. Most laborers were likely farmers who worked on the pyramid during the Nile's annual flood, when their fields were underwater and agricultural labor was impossible. They were conscripted for a season of national service, paid in food, beer, and perhaps a sense of participation in a divine endeavor. This was a state harnessing the natural rhythm of the river and the seasonal idle hands of its population with breathtaking efficiency. The project's backbone was its infrastructure, a web of organization that stretched across Egypt. Specialized quarries supplied specific types of stone. Copper for chisels was mined in the distant Sinai, requiring protected expeditions. The most critical artery was the supply chain for food. To feed a crew estimated at several thousand, the state needed a constant stream of cattle, sheep, grain, and vegetables. This required administrators, scribes to track everything, guards for transport, and butchers and brewers on site. The logistics of water alone were staggering, likely solved by digging wells or transporting water from the Nile in thousands of ceramic jars. Then came the movement of the stone itself. While the exact ramp configuration remains debated, the principle is clear. Earthen ramps, reinforced with gypsum plaster to create a hard surface, snaked up the growing sides of the pyramid. Teams of men hauled sledges bearing multi-ton blocks, with water bearers walking ahead to dampen the path and reduce friction. The coordination was precise. Blocks arrived from the quarries by barge during the flood, were offloaded at a nearby harbor, and were then dragged to the base. There, they entered a queue, moving up the ramps in a continuous, orchestrated flow. This was a symphony of human effort, conducted by a managerial class that could plan decades into the future. The pyramid, therefore, is the ultimate testament to the power of the early state. It proved that a civilization could centralize authority to the point of directing nearly all its resources toward a single, non-utilitarian goal. It was the birth of large-scale project management, of the bureaucratic mind that could break an impossible vision into a million manageable tasks. The real wonder is not that they stacked the stones, but that they convinced an entire society to do so, season after season, believing in a legacy of stone that would outlast the very memory of their names. This monumental effort set a standard, but it also revealed a limitation. The pyramid was a mountain of static weight, its interior a series of cramped, corbelled passageways. For architecture to truly breathe, to create vast, luminous spaces for the living, a new structural idea was needed, one that would turn solid walls into walls of light. Yet the pyramid's silent perfection was an architecture of the afterlife. For the living, for the daily exercise of absolute power, a different kind of structure was needed, one that pulsed with activity and ambition. This was the palace, and its emergence marked a profound shift. Here, architecture was no longer a bridge to the gods or a vessel for eternity. It became a living, breathing tool of political control. In the Bronze Age, civilizations ringing the Mediterranean and Mesopotamia, from the labyrinthine courts of Minoan Crete to the fortified citadels of Mycenaean, the palace complex arose as the world's first true machine of state. It was designed not for prayer but for policy, a physical manifestation of a ruler's reach into every corner of his domain. The most telling feature was often the first thing you encountered, the storage magazine. At Knossos in Crete, long, narrow rooms lined with massive ceramic jars called pithoi held the kingdom's wealth: olive oil, grain, wine, and textiles. This was not a family pantry. It was the central treasury filled by the tribute of outlying villages. The architecture of storage was an architecture of extraction, a silent declaration that all surplus flowed here to the heart of power. To enter the palace was to navigate a carefully choreographed journey of awe and intimidation. You would not walk directly to the throne. Instead, you were funneled through a series of courtyards and corridors, a labyrinthine path that disoriented and delayed. This controlled movement was a psychological masterstroke. It gave the visitor time to absorb the staggering scale, the vibrant frescoes of griffins and bull leapers, the sheer wealth on display. By the time you stood before the ruler, seated in a sun-drenched throne room adorned with mythical creatures, your sense of his authority was already complete. You had been processed by the building itself. Every architectural element served a dual purpose. The grand staircase was not just for ascent, it was a stage for ceremonial appearances. The columned halls provided space for large audiences where the ruler could dispense judgment and gifts, performing the role of provider and judge. Even the plumbing spoke of power. The advanced drainage systems and luxurious baths found in Minoan palaces were marvels of engineering that underscored a ruler's ability to command nature itself, bringing fresh water and removing waste in a way no ordinary home could. This centralized design made the palace the undisputed nerve center of the early state. Scribes worked in its chambers, recording transactions on clay tablets. Commanders received orders in its courtyards. Artisans produced luxury goods in its workshops. The palace was a hive of administrative activity, the place where information, goods, and commands all converged. It created a new social geography, drawing the elite to live in its shadow and leaving the common citizen outside its walls, both physically and politically. In this way, the palace complex became the direct blueprint for all future imperial governance. Its layout taught a fundamental lesson about power, that to control a territory, you must first control the space where decisions are made, where wealth is stored, and where loyalty is rewarded. The labyrinth was not just a myth, it was a managerial strategy built in stone and plaster. It asked a subtle but enduring question of every visitor and of history itself, who holds the map and who is merely walking the corridors. The palace's corridors of power demanded a new logic for the city beyond its walls. As empires expanded, swallowing diverse peoples and territories, they faced a monumental administrative challenge. How do you govern the chaos of 1,000 different towns? The answer was not just written in law, but laid out in stone and street, in the fourth principle of architectural evolution, the urban grid. This was order imposed from above, a geometric blueprint for imperial control. Forget the winding, organic lanes of early villages like Çatalhöyük, which grew from the bottom up like a living organism. The grid was a top-down vision, a statement that human society itself could be planned, measured, and regulated with the precision of a geometry lesson. One of the earliest and most astonishing examples comes not from the Mediterranean, but from the Indus Valley civilization, over 4,000 years ago. The great city of Mohenjo-Daro was a masterpiece of premeditated design. Its streets were laid out in a near-perfect orthogonal grid, with main thoroughfares running north-south and east-west, dividing the city into large, regular blocks. This was not an accident of gradual growth. This was a founding decree etched into the earth before the first brick was fired. The benefits were profound and multifaceted. For the military, straight, wide streets allowed for the rapid movement of troops to quell unrest or defend the gates. For commerce, it created predictable routes and standardized plot sizes, simplifying trade and taxation. For public health, it enabled one of the ancient world's most sophisticated systems. The grid's regularity allowed engineers to install a network of covered brick sewers beneath the streets, with individual homes connected to main drains. Fresh water was supplied from communal wells placed at strategic intersections. This was architecture in service of civic hygiene and social order on a colossal scale. The grid also served a subtler, more psychological purpose. It made the city legible to its rulers. In an organic town, a stranger could get lost and a rebel could hide. In a gridded city, every block was numbered, every intersection known. It was a panopticon made of urban planning where the very layout suggested constant observation and control. This model became the gold standard for imperial expansion. When the Greeks founded colonies across the Mediterranean, they often laid them out on a Hippodamian grid, named for the planner Hippodamus of Miletus. The Romans, masters of pragmatic rule, used the grid as the literal foundation for their new towns from Britain to North Africa. They would survey the land with a device called a groma, marking the two main axes, the Cardo and Decumanus, and then parcel out the rest of the city in perfect, military-precise rectangles. This was empire building made physical. A soldier from Rome could be posted to a frontier town in Gaul and immediately understand its layout, find the bathhouse, the forum, and the barracks. The grid created a portable, replicable model of Roman identity, stamping alien landscapes with a familiar, comforting order. It standardized life from the size of a market stall to the width of a sewer pipe. But this imposed order asks a difficult question of us today. Is the grid a symbol of enlightened planning, of public health and equal access? Or is it the ultimate expression of a central authority's will, prioritizing control and efficiency over organic community and human whimsy? The straight lines of Mohenjo-Daro and Roman colonies speak of a desire to conquer not just land but chaos itself, to replace the messy complexity of human settlement with a clean, manageable diagram. In the grid, we see the architectural soul of empire, rational, ambitious, and utterly convinced of its own right to reorganize the world. Yet, for all its power to organize life on the ground, this rigid geometry still faced a ceiling, a literal limit. The post and lintel, even refined by the arch, could only create interiors that were essentially a series of connected boxes. To build a space that truly inspired awe, that felt like a single, vast, unified cavern, would require a final, breathtaking synthesis of all the principles that came before. While empires elsewhere built walls of fear, a different dream was taking shape on an island in the wine-dark sea. On Crete, the Minoans constructed palaces that breathed. The sprawling complex of Knossos, the heart of their civilization, presents us with a profound architectural mystery, where the citadels of Mycenaean were hunkered behind Cyclopean stone walls. Knossos stood largely unfortified. Its grandeur was turned inward toward courtyards flooded with sunlight and rooms alive with art. This was not a fortress, but a labyrinthine machine for living well, a testament to a society that, for centuries, felt secure enough to prioritize beauty over battlements. Stepping into the reconstructed remains today, you are immediately struck by the play of light. Central light wells, open shafts that ran through multiple stories, pulled sunshine deep into the heart of the palace. This was a deliberate architectural choice, creating airy, luminous spaces where frescoes could glow. The walls themselves were canvases covered in vibrant scenes of leaping dolphins, elegant ladies in elaborate gowns, and the sacred bull, a central figure in Minoan ritual. The art depicts a world of natural grace, ceremony, and apparent peace, with no glorification of conquest or warriors. This obsession with light and artistry was matched by a startlingly modern concern for comfort and hygiene. The Minoans engineered one of the ancient world's most sophisticated plumbing systems. Terracotta pipes, fitted together with precision, supplied fresh water to rooms, and even provided flushing toilets for the elite. Drainage channels ran beneath floors, carrying waste away from the living quarters. This architectural investment in sanitation speaks volumes about their values. It indicates a society deeply concerned with health, with the management of their environment, and with a certain refined quality of daily life that seems almost contemporary. The palace layout itself, with its hundreds of interconnected rooms, storage magazines, workshops, and ceremonial spaces, suggests a complex, centralized administration, but one focused on the redistribution of wealth, the production of exquisite goods like perfumed oils and intricate pottery, and the staging of communal rituals. The famous throne room, with its graceful griffin frescoes flanking a simple stone seat, feels more like a sacred chamber than a seat of militaristic power. All of this presents a tantalizing and unresolved historical puzzle. What allowed the Minoans this centuries-long peace? Was it their powerful navy, the so-called thalassocracy, that kept invaders at bay? Was it their geographic isolation on an island? Or was it a cultural and religious worldview that emphasized conflict? Their architecture, devoid of grim fortifications and filled with natural light, argues for a society uniquely confident in its own stability. This makes their eventual decline around 1450 before the Common Era all the more haunting. The catalyst was likely the colossal volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera, modern Santorini. This cataclysm would have triggered tsunamis that devastated Crete's northern coasts and poisoned the skies with ash, crippling agriculture. In this weakened state, the undefended palaces were likely overrun by the more warlike Mycenaeans from the Greek mainland. The Minoan enigma, therefore, lies in this tragic duality. Their architecture represents one of humanity's most hopeful experiments, a vision of a stone-based civilization that chose light wells over lookout towers, frescoes over fortifications, and plumbing over parapets. It shows us that sophistication does not inevitably demand walls. For a glorious period, they built a world where the greatest threat was not the enemy at the gate, but the earthquake beneath the foundations and the fire from the sky. Their legacy is a haunting question etched in colorful plaster and clever pipes. Is a civilization that chooses beauty over defense ultimately a fragile one, or is it perhaps the most advanced vision of all? This peaceful experiment would not last, but its architectural principles of light, art, and living well would echo through the ages, even as the world turned toward a new, more imposing model of power, one that sought not just to organize space, but to dominate it completely with sheer, overwhelming scale. The confidence of the Minoans would have seemed like a dangerous fantasy to their mainland neighbors. Across the Aegean Sea, the Mycenaean Greeks built a world defined by a very different priority, one carved into mountains of jagged limestone. Their architecture was not an invitation but a warning. It spoke the language of raw, intimidating power, of a society organized not for gracious living but for relentless defense and conquest. The very stones they used tell this story. Mycenaean masons worked with massive, irregular blocks, some weighing many tons. They fitted these giants together with such cunning precision that the joints between them were tight and complex, requiring no mortar to hold them in place. Later Greeks, looking upon these ruins, could not believe human hands were responsible. They attributed the work to the mythical one-eyed giants, the Cyclopes. Thus, the term Cyclopean was born, a label that perfectly captures the architecture's overwhelming, almost supernatural scale. The most famous entrance to this world of stone is the Lion Gate at Mycenae. Passing through it was a carefully orchestrated experience of awe and fear. You would first approach along a narrow, walled pathway, exposed and vulnerable, with defenders watching from above. Then you would stand before the gate itself, a massive lintel stone estimated to weigh over 20 tons, but the true psychological masterstroke rests atop it. A triangular slab of relief sculpture shows two lionesses, their bodies powerful and stylized, standing on their hind legs, their forepaws resting on a single, tapering column. Their heads, now lost, would have been turned to face anyone entering, a permanent, silent roar carved in stone. This was not mere decoration. It was a heraldic emblem, a symbol of the royal family's divine authority and ferocious strength. To walk beneath those lions was to submit, physically and symbolically, to the power within. This obsession with impregnable security extended even to the realm of the dead. The Mycenaean warrior kings were laid to rest in spectacular beehive-shaped tombs known as tholoi. The most magnificent is the so-called treasury of Atreus. To build it, engineers first cut a long, open passageway into a hillside. At the end of this passage, they constructed the tomb chamber itself using a brilliant technique called corbelling. Starting from a circular base, each course or layer of stone was laid so that it slightly overlapped the one below. Imagine a stack of plates, with each plate positioned a little closer to the center than the one beneath it. Layer by layer, the circle grew smaller, the stones leaning inward until they finally met at the top, sealed by a single capstone. The result was a soaring, domed space nearly 50 feet high, lined with precisely cut stones and once adorned with bronze rosettes. The engineering was a breathtaking display of skill, but its purpose was unequivocal. This vault was a fortress for eternity, designed to protect the king's wealth and body in death as his Cyclopean walls had protected his power in life. Every aspect of this architecture, from the gate to the tomb, served a single social vision. It reflected a society rigidly hierarchical, dominated by a warrior aristocracy whose status was proven through battle and monumental construction. The walls declared the community's security, the gate proclaimed the king's unmatched authority, and the tomb guaranteed his glorious legacy. In the stark contrast between the airy courts of Knossos and the grim gates of Mycenae, we see two possible paths for a stone-based civilization, one that looked inward toward light and life, and another that looked outward, preparing for threat and glory. The Mycenaean model, one of concentrated, fortified power, would cast a long shadow, influencing how future empires would think about security, symbolism, and the stone expression of sheer might. The Mycenaean vision of power, carved in Cyclopean stone, found a fierce echo far to the east. In the rugged highlands of Anatolia, an empire rose that understood the language of the fortress intimately. The Hittites did not just build walls, they engineered entire landscapes into instruments of defense. Their capital, Hattusa, was not placed on a convenient plain, but deliberately nestled within a ring of formidable mountains. This was a city designed from the ground up to be unconquerable, a statement of Imperial will hewn directly from the bones of the earth. Approaching Hattusa, a visitor would first be confronted by miles of monumental stone walls, snaking over ridges and plunging into valleys, following every contour of the land. These were not simple barriers. They were layered defenses with massive, sloping foundations and towering superstructures of mudbrick atop stone bases. But the true genius lay in the details invisible from the outside. The Hittites riddled their fortifications with secret tunnels, postern gates hidden from view, allowing defenders to move troops swiftly along the wall or launch surprise attacks on besiegers. It was a dynamic, three-dimensional system of defense, treating the entire city as a single, living fortress. The gateways into this stone labyrinth were masterpieces of psychological warfare. They were not mere openings, but guarded by colossal stone sentinels. At the most famous, the Lion Gate and the Sphinx Gate, visitors would pass beneath the gaze of these mythical creatures, carved from single blocks of stone. The lions, with their powerful bodies and intense stares, projected raw, protective power. The sphinxes, with their enigmatic human-headed forms, spoke of esoteric knowledge and divine sanction. Passing through was a ritual of submission, impressing upon all who entered that they were moving from the chaotic outside world into a realm of ordered, guarded power. This power had a very tangible source. The Hittites were early masters of ironworking, a technology as valuable as any treasury. Their fortress cities were not just political capitals, they were secure vaults for this military-industrial secret. The defensible terrain and immense walls protected the workshops where smiths turned ore into weapons that could outperform bronze, giving the Hittite army a cutting-edge advantage. Within these formidable walls, the architecture told a story of sharp social division. The city was a tiered society in stone. For the common people, housing was often simple, built from perishable materials like wood and mudbrick. But for the ruling elite and the gods, the Hittites used massively dressed stone cut with precision. The great temple at Hattusa, dedicated to the storm god and the sun goddess, was a sprawling complex built around vast courtyards, its foundations and doorways made from these colossal, finely finished blocks. The contrast was deliberate and profound. The enduring, beautiful stone was reserved for the institutions of state and religion, visually cementing the idea that the king and the gods were permanent, while the lives of the people were transient. This architectural duality is a theme we see in every emerging empire, a physical manifestation of the hierarchy that holds a complex society together. The Hittite fortress, therefore, was more than a military installation. It was the ultimate expression of a society that saw the world as a place of threats and valuable secrets, where security was paramount, and where the might of the state was literally set in stone, guarding the high ground between the mountains and the heavens. The fortress walls of Hattusa spoke of raw strength, but another architectural element was quietly evolving to express a more refined kind of power. It began as the most humble of things, a wooden post driven into the ground to hold up a roof. Yet this simple support would become the fifth principle, the column, transforming from pure function into the most eloquent symbol of an entire civilization's soul. Its journey is the story of architecture learning to speak. In its earliest stone form, the column was a workhorse of space. The Egyptians used forests of them to create vast, awe-inspiring interiors. The Great Hypostyle Hall at Karnak is a petrified forest of stone, with 134 massive columns arranged in a dense grid, their bulbous papyrus-shaped capitals supporting a roof of colossal stone slabs. Walking through that hall was an experience of overwhelming scale, the dim light filtering between the towering shafts, making the pharaoh's subjects feel small and the gods feel immense. Here, the column's purpose was clear: to hold up an impossible weight and create a sacred, enclosed world, but it was already becoming something more. The carving of the columns to resemble bundles of papyrus or lotus plants tied this immense engineering feat back to the natural world of the Nile, a stone poem about the origins of life. This idea of the column as a decorated element blossomed fully in the Aegean world. In the Minoan palaces, columns tapered elegantly from a wide top to a narrower base, the reverse of what logic might suggest. They were painted vibrant reds and blacks, and their capitals were simple, rounded cushions. These were not crude posts, they were designed elements, contributing to the palace's aesthetic of light, color, and graceful innovation. They held up the light wells and porticos, framing views and defining courtyards. But the final, revolutionary step in this evolution occurred in Greece. Here, the column was systematized into a language. Greek architects developed the architectural orders, strict sets of rules governing the proportions, ornamentation, and relationship of every part of a building, with the column as its central protagonist. The Doric order was the first, masculine and severe. Its column had no base, rising directly from the temple floor like a sturdy tree trunk. The capital was a plain, rounded slab. This was architecture as strength, as logical order, reflecting the austere ideals of early city-states like Sparta. Then came the Ionic order, a vision of graceful intellect. Its columns were taller and more slender, resting on a sculpted base. The capital was adorned with a distinctive scroll called a volute on either side. This order spoke of elegance, learning, and sophistication, favored in prosperous trading centers like Athens. Finally, the Corinthian order emerged, an embodiment of opulent beauty. Its capital was an explosion of sculpted acanthus leaves, delicate and ornate, as if the column were bursting into bloom. This was not just support, it was a celebration of artistry and abundance. This transformation was profound. The column ceased to be merely a device for holding something up. It became a carrier of meaning, a stone embodiment of cultural values. Choosing the Doric over the Ionic was a philosophical statement, a declaration of whether a society prized martial virtue or cultivated grace. The precise mathematical ratios that governed the column's height and thickness were not just about stability, they were a pursuit of perfect harmony, a belief that beauty itself could be found in numerical proportion. This made the Greek column endlessly adaptable. When the Romans conquered Greece, they did not discard this language, they absorbed it and spread it. They used the sturdy Doric for military buildings, the elegant Ionic for libraries, and the lavish Corinthian for temples to their emperors, adding their own composite style. For millennia afterward, from Renaissance palaces to modern banks and government buildings, the column has been borrowed to lend an air of legitimacy, stability, and classical virtue. Its form whispers of an idealized past, a connection to the philosophical and aesthetic roots of the West. The journey from a rough wooden post to the flowing acanthus leaves of Corinthian tells us something essential. It reveals that at the height of their power, civilizations stop building just for need and start building for idea. They turn engineering into art, and in doing so, they create a visual language so powerful it can outlast their empires by thousands of years. The column's eloquent language of order and beauty was a philosophy carved in stone. But in the hands of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, architecture learned to speak a far more brutal and persuasive dialect. For the Assyrian kings, stone was not for contemplation, it was for conquest. Their palaces were not merely seats of power, they were machines of psychological warfare, designed to broadcast a single, terrifying message across the known world. To understand this, you must walk the halls of King Ashurnasirpal II's palace at Nimrud. From the outside, it was a mountain of mudbrick, imposing but mute. The real communication began the moment you passed the threshold, under the gaze of the Lamashu. These were not mere statues. They were colossal hybrid guardians, carved from single blocks of alabaster, standing over 15 feet tall. With the body of a bull or lion, the wings of an eagle, and the bearded head of a king crowned with a horned helmet, they were a physical amalgamation of every symbol of strength and divinity the Assyrians knew. But their most ingenious feature was an optical illusion of power. Each Lamashu was carved with 5 legs. From the front, it appeared standing firm, a vigilant sentinel. From the side, it appeared striding forward, an unstoppable force in motion. This was the empire's first statement to any visitor. You are being watched by a power that is both immovable and perpetually advancing. Once past these silent sentinels, the visitor entered a world where the walls themselves spoke. Every corridor and courtyard of the palace was lined with detailed narrative reliefs, a vast stone comic strip of imperial propaganda. The scenes were meticulously crafted and repeated. You would see the king, always larger than any other figure, engaged in the royal lion hunt. In one panel, he stands calmly in his chariot, drawing his bow as a lion, reared up on its hind legs, attacks. In the next, the lion lies dead at his feet. This was not sport, it was a sacred ritual. By depicting himself mastering the chaos and danger of nature's most ferocious beast, the king demonstrated his role as the protector of cosmic order. The message was clear: if he can defeat the king of beasts, what chance do mere human enemies have? The answer was shown on the next wall. Here were the military campaigns, depicted with chilling, bureaucratic detail. Siege engines scaled city walls. Enemy soldiers fell in organized rows. Captives were led away in lines, their hands bound. The artistry was not about glorifying bloodshed in a graphic sense, but about documenting the inevitable, systematic nature of Assyrian victory. The focus was on the logistics of dominance, the engineering of siege towers, the orderly procession of tribute, the absolute control over defeated peoples. There were no scenes of individual heroics, only the impersonal, grinding machine of the empire at work. This architectural program served a precise political function. For visiting ambassadors from rival states or restive provinces, a tour of the palace was a calculated ordeal. It was a silent, overwhelming lecture on Assyrian invincibility. The sheer scale of the Lamashu, the relentless repetition of victory on the walls, the sheer volume of carved stone, all communicated resources and resolve on an unimaginable level. It made rebellion seem not just treasonous, but utterly futile. For the Assyrian elite and bureaucracy who lived and worked there, the palace was a constant reinforcement of ideology, a daily immersion in the story of their own supremacy. This represents a final, chilling evolution in our architectural journey. The Assyrians perfected the use of stone not to house the gods, or even just to house the king, but to house an idea, the idea of total imperial dominance. The palace was a broadcast tower made of alabaster, transmitting its signal of fear and awe across the empire without a single word being spoken. It asked every subject and every enemy a single, paralyzing question, documented in endless stone panels: why would you even try? But the Assyrian message of terror contained a fatal flaw. An empire built solely on fear is a permanent siege, exhausting both the conqueror and the conquered. The next great power to arise looked upon this model and chose a different path, one of breathtaking synthesis. The Achaemenid Persian Empire did not just build monuments to its own power, it built a visual constitution for a multicultural world. At the heart of this vision stood Persepolis, a ceremonial capital that was less a fortress and more a grand stage for a new kind of imperial order. Here, architecture became a language of unity. Rather than erasing the cultures it absorbed, Persia wove their greatest achievements into a single, harmonious tapestry. The platform itself, a vast artificial terrace cut into a mountainside, echoed the raised ziggurats of Mesopotamia. The colossal columned halls, called apodanas, took the Greek idea of the columned space and scaled it to a previously unimaginable level. Yet the columns themselves were a unique fusion. Their bases were often bell-shaped, inspired by artworks from conquered Ionia. Their capitals were staggering stone sculptures, taking the form of twin-headed bulls, lions, or griffins, creatures whose symbolism stretched from Assyria to the Eurasian steppes. These mythical beasts did not glare down as guardians of terror, but served as elegant, weight-bearing supports for a cedarwood roof imported from Lebanon. Every material and motif was a deliberate choice, a nod to a different corner of the empire, assembled under Persian direction. The true genius of Persepolis, however, is revealed not in its halls but on the stairways that led to them. The famous reliefs lining the grand staircases are a stone documentary of the empire's annual celebration, the Nowruz festival. Here, the message shifts dramatically from Assyrian brutality. There are no scenes of warfare, subjugation, or execution. Instead, we see a serene, endless procession. Representatives from all 23 subject nations are depicted, each group led by a Persian or Median usher. The delegates are shown in their distinct national dress, carrying the unique tribute of their homeland, from Bactrian camels and Indian ivory to Lydian gold vessels and Babylonian textiles. The detail is meticulous and respectful, cataloging the diversity of the empire not as a list of defeated enemies, but as a gathering of honored guests contributing to a shared whole. This was a revolutionary architectural statement. The king of kings, was not shown dominating beasts or crushing cities. He was shown enthroned, receiving this global procession in a spirit of peaceful reciprocity. The architecture framed him not as a terrifying warlord, but as the benevolent center of a stable, prosperous, and inclusive world system, maintained through awe and obligation rather than constant violence. This synthesis extended to construction itself. Persian engineers masterfully combined materials, using stone for the foundations and magnificent carvings, but employing wood for the vast ceilings of the apodanas. This combination allowed them to create the largest enclosed spaces the world had yet seen, airy and luminous, perfect for hosting thousands of dignitaries. Persepolis was thus a deliberate paradox, a symbol of absolute power expressed through gestures of cultural inclusion. It asked a profound question of every visitor from every nation. Can an empire be strongest when it acknowledges the strengths of others? By weaving the architectural languages of Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, and Greece into a new Persian whole, they created a visual argument for their legitimacy. They were not destroyers of culture, but its ultimate curators and unifiers. In the silent, sun-baked ruins of those stairways, we see the ancient world's most ambitious attempt to build an idea, the idea that diversity itself, when properly orchestrated, could be the foundation of enduring power. Persepolis presented a vision of empire built on synthesis, but its grand staircases lead us to a deeper, more universal question. What if the ultimate expression of a complex society wasn't a city of bustling streets and written decrees at all? What if it was a silent field of standing stones, or a vast earthen mound sculpted by thousands of hands? Across the globe, in places far removed from the river valleys of Mesopotamia and Egypt, we find evidence of societies that achieved staggering levels of coordination and purpose, leaving behind monuments that rival any imperial palace, yet they built no cities in the traditional sense and left no written records. These megalithic cultures suggest a separate, parallel path to complexity, one where the drive to build united people in a different kind of empire, an empire of shared belief. Consider the Great Mound at Cahokia, which once rose from the floodplain of the Mississippi River. Today, we call it Monk's Mound, a colossal earthen pyramid with a base larger than that of the Great Pyramid at Giza. It was not built of quarried stone, but of basketload after basketload of soil, carefully carried and packed by a society we know only through archaeology. Cahokia was not a city of stone buildings, but a vast ceremonial landscape of over 120 mounds, plazas, and wooden structures, home to tens of thousands at its peak around the year 1050 of the Common Era. The construction required a level of social organization that is breathtaking. Someone had to plan the layout, align the mounds to celestial events like the solstices, and coordinate the labor of a population for generations. They moved an estimated 55 million cubic feet of earth, all without the wheel, without draft animals, and without a written language to issue commands. This was not the work of a simple village. It was the product of a sophisticated, hierarchical society with powerful spiritual and political leaders, a North American counterpart to the early states of the Old World, yet it expressed its complexity through soil and ceremony rather than brick and bureaucracy. Even more enigmatic are the temple builders of the tiny Mediterranean islands of Malta. Here, over 5,000 years ago, a culture erected some of the world's oldest freestanding stone structures, predating the pyramids of Egypt. The temples of Haga Kim and Emnajdra are labyrinths of massive, corbelled stone chambers, their walls built from limestone blocks weighing many tons. The interiors are carved with intricate spiral motifs and furnished with altars and oracle holes. The architectural precision is matched by a deep astronomical alignment. Doorways and chambers are oriented to capture the rising sun on the equinoxes and solstices. This implies not just builders but priest astronomers with accumulated knowledge passed down orally over centuries. Yet again, we find no evidence of large, dense urban settlements, defensive walls, or written records. The Maltese temple culture seems to have channeled its entire societal energy, its surplus labor, and its intellectual capital into these sacred complexes. Their empire was not one of territory or written law, but of ritual space and cosmic connection. These examples force us to challenge our very definition of an empire. We traditionally measure complexity by the presence of cities, writing, metallurgy, and armies. But the mound builders and temple makers ask us, is the truest measure of a civilization's sophistication its ability to organize people around a shared, monumental idea? The labor required to build Cahokia or the Maltese temples is indistinguishable from the labor that built the Ziggurats or the first phases of Stonehenge. It demands planning, resource management, and a compelling belief system that can motivate generations of work. This suggests the human drive to manipulate our environment on a colossal scale, to create permanent markers in the landscape that speak of communal identity and cosmic order, might be a fundamental impulse. It is a track that runs parallel to the story of walled cities and imperial conquest. One path leads to the administrative palace at Persepolis, the other to the solstice-aligned chamber at Emnajdra. Both are testaments to the human capacity for large-scale cooperation, one channeled through the state, the other perhaps through the temple. This silent stone and earth track in our evolution reveals that before we built empires to rule people, we may have first built monuments to unite them, creating landscapes of belief that were, in their own way, just as powerful and enduring. The dome is architecture's final, triumphant answer to the sky. After mastering walls, columns, and arches, humanity faced its greatest spatial challenge: how to roof a vast, open area without a forest of internal supports. The solution was to turn the arch on its head, or rather, to spin it completely around. By rotating a compressive arch through a full circle, you create a dome, a structure that encloses space with a single, soaring gesture. Its earliest whispers can be found in the ancient world, in the corbelled, beehive tombs of the Mycenaeans, where stones were stacked in ever tighter rings until they met at a point. But this was a tentative approach, a stacking method that created a high, pointed interior. The true, revolutionary dome is not stacked, it is woven from compression. This was the genius Rome would perfect, transforming a structural principle into a spiritual universe. A true dome is a continuous shell of masonry, where every stone or brick is locked in a perfect, balanced push against its neighbors. The weight of the entire structure flows gracefully down its curving sides, channeled outward and downward into a supporting ring of walls or piers below. This elegant distribution of force meant that the interior could be completely free, a vast, unified cavern of space. For the first time, architecture could create an interior that felt less like a built room and more like a captured piece of the cosmos. The Romans understood this symbolic power intuitively. They used domes to crown their most important baths and temples, creating spaces that were both grand public venues and profound psychological experiences. The ultimate expression of this ambition is the Pantheon in Rome, a building that has stood for nearly 2,000 years. Its dome is not just a roof, it is a perfect hemisphere of concrete, resting upon a massive cylindrical drum. The engineering is a masterpiece of both boldness and subtlety. The concrete itself was a Roman innovation, a mix of mortar and aggregate that could be poured into wooden frames, allowing for shapes stone blocks never could. To build the Pantheon's dome, engineers made the mix lighter and lighter as it rose, using porous volcanic stone at the top to reduce the crushing weight. The thick drum walls contain hidden voids and arches that act like a skeletal system, strategically redistributing the immense loads, and at the very crown they placed the oculus, a circular opening 30 feet across. This is the dome's final, breathtaking stroke. It is the only source of light, a single eye to the heavens. The beam of sunlight that pours through traces a path across the interior throughout the day, marking the passage of time like a cosmic sundial. To stand beneath it is to feel simultaneously sheltered and exposed to the infinite, a human-scale figure standing at the center of a man-made firmament. This is why the dome became more than a roof, it became a universal symbol. In a tomb, it represented the vault of the afterlife. In a temple or a church, it symbolized the dome of heaven itself, the dwelling place of the divine. When the architectural knowledge of Rome passed to the Byzantine Empire, they pushed the form even further, creating the vast, seemingly floating dome of the Hagia Sophia, which appeared to rest on a ring of light from its many windows. Later, Islamic architects adopted and adapted the dome for mosques, seeing it as a representation of the universe created by a single, all-encompassing God. In every case, the dome served the same purpose: to create a microcosm, a complete world under one roof. Its construction represented the pinnacle of a society's technical knowledge, its material resources, and its spiritual ambition. It asked the people beneath it to look up, not at a ceiling, but at an idea, a perfect geometric representation of order, unity, and celestial aspiration. The dome taught us that the greatest spaces are not those that simply cover us, but those that inspire us to contemplate what lies beyond. While the Romans were perfecting the dome to touch the heavens, another civilization, millennia earlier, had already mastered the art of building for the earth. In the fertile floodplains of the Indus River, a society flourished that seems to have answered the questions of power and permanence in a completely different way. Their greatest monuments were not pyramids or palaces, but something far more revolutionary: a well-planned street and a working drain. The Indus Valley civilization, at its peak around 2,500 years before the Common Era, presents one of history's most captivating architectural puzzles. Its cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro reveal a staggering priority, civic order and public health on a scale the ancient world would not see again for thousands of years. Unlike the Ziggurats of Mesopotamia or the tombs of Egypt, no colossal temples dedicated to a king god dominate the skyline here. Instead, the most impressive structures are the foundations of an entire social idea, built in millions of identical bricks. The standardization is astonishing. Across an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, builders used bricks of a uniform ratio, 1:2:4. Whether you were in a large city or a small town, the brick you held was the same size. This was not an accident. It represents a level of central planning and shared technical knowledge that implies a powerful, cohesive cultural authority, but one that chose to express its power through harmony and efficiency, not through statues of its rulers. Walking through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, you are struck by the rationality. The city is laid out on a precise grid pattern, with wide main streets running north-south and east-west, dividing the urban space into large, rectangular blocks. Smaller lanes branch off, providing access to individual homes. This orderly plan suggests a society that valued predictability, easy movement, and perhaps social equality. The grandeur was in the system, not in any single building, but the true genius of the Indus architects lay beneath the streets. They engineered the world's first comprehensive urban sanitation system. Almost every house had its own private bathing area with a watertight floor and a drain. Wastewater from these baths and from indoor latrines was channeled into covered brick drains that ran along the streets. These drains were carefully designed with inspection holes and sump pots to collect solid waste for periodic cleaning. Major streets had corbelled brick culverts large enough for a person to walk through, carrying everything to the outskirts of the city. This was an unprecedented investment in public health and communal living. It required a shared understanding of hygiene, a municipal authority to maintain the system, and a collective agreement that the well-being of the entire city depended on this unseen, underground network. What does this focus tell us about the people who built it? The absence of obvious royal palaces, of grandiose tombs filled with treasure, or of monumental art glorifying conquest, suggests a social structure that remains deeply mysterious. Power seems to have been invested in a system, perhaps a council of elders or a priestly class concerned with ritual purity, rather than in a single, glorified individual. Their wealth was channeled into communal infrastructure, into crafting exquisite seals for trade, and into building a stable, clean, and orderly urban environment. This creates a haunting contrast with every other early civilization we have discussed. Here, architecture was not a tool to separate the divine king from the people, but a tool to unite the people in a shared, clean, and well-ordered space. The great enigma of the Indus Valley is not how they built, but why they chose to build this way. Was it a response to the challenges of dense urban living in a river valley? Was it driven by a religious or philosophical belief in purity and balance? Their silent, standardized cities, with their brilliant plumbing and missing kings, force us to reconsider the very definition of a complex society. They prove that a civilization can reach astonishing heights of planning and cooperation without leaving behind the towering ego of a single ruler, a quiet testament to the power of the collective, etched not in gold, but in perfectly laid brick and the flow of clean water. This drive for the colossal is a near-universal signature of the early state. From the banks of the Nile to the plains of Mesopotamia, from the Mississippi to the highlands of Peru, emerging civilizations independently arrived at the same conclusion, that to be powerful was to build big. But why? What compels a society to redirect its precious resources, its labor, and its imagination away from immediate needs and into mountains of stone or earth? The answer lies not in engineering manuals, but in the human heart and the social contract. At its core, monumental scale is a language, and it speaks several profound messages all at once. For the ruling elite, it is the ultimate tool of legitimacy. A king who can command the movement of a mountain of stone is demonstrating a power that feels divine. He is proving his unique connection to the gods, his ability to organize the impossible, and his right to demand the obedience and taxes of his people. The pyramid is not just a tomb, it is a rhizome carved in limestone. It visually cements a social hierarchy, placing the ruler literally and figuratively above everyone else, his authority set in a permanence that ordinary homes could never achieve. This stone statement asks a silent, powerful question of every subject: who but a god could build this, and by extension, who but a god should rule us? Yet this is only one side of the story. The psychological drive is also deeply communal. Participating in a grand project, whether hauling a stone for a pyramid or carrying a basket of earth for a mound, creates a powerful shared identity. It transforms a population from a collection of families or clans into a single people with a common purpose. This shared labor forges a collective memory, a story that begins with, "We built this together." The monument becomes a focal point for pride and belonging, its scale a measure of the community's unity and strength. It tells both its builders and outsiders, we are many, we are organized, and we can accomplish wonders. This impulse often intertwines with the spiritual. Colossal structures frequently serve as bridges to the unseen world. The ziggurat was a stairway for the gods. The pyramid was a machine for celestial rebirth. The great mound at Cahokia likely aligned with the cosmos, anchoring the community to the cycles of the sun and moon. By building on a scale that dwarfs human beings, societies made the intangible tangible. They created a physical place where the divine could be approached, where rituals could be performed to ensure fertility, victory, or cosmic order. The sheer effort itself was a form of devotion, a sacrifice of time and labor meant to appease ancestors or deities. In this light, the monument is a prayer built in stone, a desperate and beautiful attempt to impose human meaning onto a vast and unpredictable universe. Finally, there is the deep human longing for immortality. Mudbrick houses crumble, wooden posts rot, and even great leaders are forgotten, but a mountain of stone that can defy time. To build something colossal is to send a message into the future, a declaration that we were here, we mattered, and our beliefs were worth this eternal effort. It is an act of profound hope against oblivion. When we look at the Great Pyramid today, we are not just seeing an ancient tomb, we are receiving a communication from a civilization that desperately wanted to be remembered. They traded generations of labor for a shot at eternity, and in a way they succeeded. Their names may be lost, but their ambition is still visible on the horizon. This quest for scale, therefore, marks the precise moment architecture transcends mere utility. A hut keeps you dry, a wall keeps you safe, but a pyramid, a ziggurat, or a colossal mound does something else entirely. It becomes a permanent record of a society's deepest ambitions and its most profound fears, carved directly into the landscape itself. It is a culture's autobiography, written not in words but in weight, height, and the patient, enduring alignment of stone with the stars. This universal impulse raises a final, reflective question for us. In our modern world of steel and glass, what are the colossal projects that define our own societal ambitions, and what will they say about us to the people of the distant future? The silent autobiography of a civilization is written in the materials it chooses. For thousands of years, humanity built with what was immediately at hand, stacking stone upon stone, brick upon brick. But a hidden revolution was unfolding in the spaces between those blocks, a quiet evolution of the stuff that held them together. This was the journey from simple mud to world-changing mortar, a material science story that unlocked the true potential of stone empires. It begins with the most humble of substances, earth mixed with water. Mud mortar was the first glue of architecture, used to bed bricks and stones, filling gaps and providing a level surface. But it had a fatal flaw. When it got wet, it softened, turned to slurry, and washed away. A heavy rain could undermine a wall, and constant exposure to moisture meant constant repair. This vulnerability placed a hard limit on what could be built, especially for structures exposed to the elements or meant to hold back water. The quest for a more durable binder led to the first great innovation, the discovery of plaster. In regions rich in gypsum or limestone, early builders learned that heating these stones in a fire transformed them. The heat drove off water and carbon, leaving behind a fine, white powder. When this powder was mixed with water again, a miraculous chemical reaction occurred. It didn't just dry, it recrystallized, hardening into a strong, cohesive mass that was resistant to water. Gypsum plaster, used extensively in ancient Egypt to coat the walls of tombs and palaces, set relatively quickly. Lime plaster, made from burned limestone, was even stronger and more versatile. These were the first true chemical adhesives in human history. They allowed for smooth, finished surfaces that could be painted, creating the vibrant frescoes of Minoan Crete and the detailed reliefs of Assyria. More importantly, they protected structures from weathering, extending their lives for generations. But plaster, for all its virtues, was still primarily a surface treatment or a bedding agent for masonry. It could bind, but it could not bear immense structural loads on its own. The final, revolutionary leap came from the pragmatic genius of Rome, with an invention so profound it reshaped the physical world: opus cementitium, Roman concrete. This was not a single material, but a sophisticated recipe. The Romans took slaked lime, a product of burned and quenched limestone, and mixed it with two crucial ingredients. First, a fine volcanic ash called pozzolana, sourced from deposits near Pompeii. This ash contained silica and alumina, which reacted with the lime and water to form a cementitious gel. Second, an aggregate, often rubble from old buildings, broken bricks, or fist-sized stones. This mix was revolutionary. Unlike cut stone, which had to be meticulously shaped and lifted into place, concrete could be poured into wooden molds called formwork. It was fluid, adaptable, taking the shape of any container. As it cured, the chemical reaction with the pozzolana created a binder that was not only incredibly strong but also hydraulic, meaning it could set and harden even underwater. This last property changed everything. Suddenly, builders could construct harbors, breakwaters, and bridge piers directly in rivers and seas, their concrete masses curing into monolithic, water-resistant fortresses of stone. On land, concrete liberated architectural form from the tyranny of the lintel and the post. Because it was poured, it could create continuous, flowing shapes that were immensely strong in compression. It made the arch, the vault, and the dome not just possible but practical on a colossal scale. The concrete of the Pantheon's dome, lighter at the top with porous volcanic aggregate, is the ultimate testament to this freedom. But the true empire-building power of concrete was seen in infrastructure. It built the aqueducts that marched across valleys, their graceful arcades often filled with concrete cores. It lined the vast public baths, creating waterproof, heated floors and soaring vaulted ceilings. It paved the roads that networked the empire and formed the foundations of tenement blocks that housed 1 million people in Rome itself. Concrete was the unsung skeleton of imperial might, the material that turned ambitious blueprints into enduring reality. It democratized large-scale construction, allowing for rapid, standardized building with less skilled labor than required for fine stone carving. This materials revolution, from mud to mortar to concrete, represents a shift from working with nature's given forms to actively transforming nature's chemistry. It granted builders a new kind of agency, the power to create stone where there was none, to defy water, and to sculpt space itself. The binding agent became the building block, and in that alchemical transformation, the ancient world found the physical freedom to build its grandest dreams. The stones they set in place never truly stopped speaking. Those early empires, from the mudbrick ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the concrete domes of Rome, did far more than construct buildings. They established a foundational vocabulary for civilization itself, a set of architectural principles so powerful they were adopted, adapted, and woven into the fabric of every major culture that followed. Consider the urban grid, first laid out with such stunning precision at Mohenjo-Daro. That same logic of orderly, predictable streets was the blueprint for Greek colonial cities, for the Roman military camps that became European capitals, and ultimately, for the sprawling street plans of modern metropolises from New York to Buenos Aires. When you navigate a city using numbered streets and ordered blocks, you are following a 5,000-year-old script for managing human society. The arch, perfected by Rome, became the skeletal system of medieval cathedrals, the graceful spine of Renaissance bridges, and the hidden strength within countless railway viaducts and stadiums. Its evolved form, the steel-frame skeleton of our skyscrapers, operates on the same fundamental principle of channeling weight along a curve. And Roman concrete, that alchemical mix of ash and lime, was a lost secret for centuries, but its rediscovery and evolution gave us the material that literally built the modern world, from the Hoover Dam to the foundations beneath our homes. These are not just historical curiosities, they are active, living inheritances, but the legacy runs deeper than engineering. These early stone empires gifted us the very concept of the monumental civic space. The Greek agora, the Roman forum, the stepped platforms of Mesopotamian temples, all served as the heart of public life, blending commerce, politics, and spirituality. That idea of a central place where community is performed and identity is forged echoes in our city halls, our national malls, and our great public squares. They also solidified the image of the capital city, a primary center of administrative power whose architecture broadcasts authority, from Washington, D.C., with its neoclassical columns directly quoting Republican Rome, to the grand axial boulevards of Paris and Beijing. The language of imperial urban planning is still used to convey stability and state power. Even our drive to create lasting public works, aqueducts that became water treatment plants, royal roads that became highway systems, speaks to an ancient understanding that infrastructure is the bedrock of an enduring society. Ultimately, what these civilizations passed down was a set of tools for translating abstract ideas into physical form. They discovered how to use scale to express awe, how to use geometry to impose order, and how to use materials to defy time. They built the first drafts of our world, so the next time you walk down a straight street, pass under a bridge, or gaze up at a domed Capitol building, you are not just seeing stone, steel, or concrete. You are reading a chapter from humanity's oldest and most ambitious story, a story of how we learned to shape our world, and in doing so, began to define what civilization could be. The evolution from simple settlements to stone empires is not a closed history book. It is the very ground we stand on and the skyline we look toward, a permanent conversation between the past and the future, written in the enduring language of built form. But a foundation stone is more than just a physical anchor. It is the first expression of a human desire to leave a mark, to build something that will outlast a single season or a single life. That desire, once kindled, became an unquenchable fire. It drove us to solve the puzzle of the doorway with the post and lintel, to create sheltered space where before there was only solid wall. It pushed us to master the curve of the arch, learning to make gravity itself a partner in our designs, allowing us to span rivers with aqueducts and eventually to crown our greatest spaces with the heavens of the dome. We organized our collective lives with the rational logic of the grid, turning chaotic settlements into legible cities, and we gave voice to our values through the eloquent language of the column, turning simple supports into symbols of strength, grace, and beauty. Each of these principles was a hard-won answer to a fundamental question, born from the changing needs of community, defense, power, and spirit. The ziggurat was a stairway for prayer, the pyramid a machine for eternity, the palace a stage for absolute authority, and the sewer a testament to a society's care for its own well-being. These structures are far more than ancient ruins or tourist destinations. They are the fossilized dreams of our ancestors, permanent records of what they feared, what they worshipped, and what they believed was worth an unimaginable expenditure of sweat, time, and faith. They stand as a silent dialogue across millennia, asking us not just how they were built, but why. They challenge our modern assumptions about cooperation and power, showing us societies that could move mountains with ropes and shared belief long before the age of machinery. So as we look at our own world of glass and steel, at the soaring skylines and sprawling suburbs, we are left with a final, reflective question. What are the foundational principles of our own age? What dreams are we fossilizing in our materials? Future civilizations may not marvel at our pyramids, but they will study the footprints of our cities, the logic of our networks, and the monuments we chose to make permanent. The story from mud hut to marble empire is ultimately our story, a continuous thread of ambition and ingenuity. It reminds us that every building, from the humblest home to the grandest capital, begins with a single, deliberate choice to shape the world. And that choice is a legacy waiting to be read by the people of a distant